What's up? Let's take a look at what I have for my final project here. Let's just break down all the individual areas, I guess. Up top, we have drop-down menu, right? You can select who's taking the quiz. After that, there's a kind of a welcome spot. If you hover over it, it changes the welcome message. But then that also, using JavaScript, gets reflected whatever you said your name was of that drop-down menu. Otherwise in here, we have kind of a cool little applet here where it just kind of draws on whatever angle I specify. So if we say, okay, I want 90-degree angle, draws it on, right? It does that by using a canvas overlaid on top of just a regular image. If you hover over this little rectangle here, it'll clear off whatever angles you've drawn. So pretty straightforward. You don't really need to click it, but it doesn't make a massive difference other than reloading the page there to do so. But you can see otherwise that another section I have going on here is a number of conversions that are added, and this is the data element that I had going on. So 30 degrees is 0.52 radians, whatever radians is that many degrees, goes back and forth. So whatever number of degrees I want, so say 180 degrees, right, that should be pi radians. So 180 degrees, I just hover over degrees, it adds it. You can see if I just hover over the clear conversions, eliminates that there, which is kind of cool. But again, if I say like 89 radians, how many degrees is that? It would be theoretically that many number of degrees. So again, I'll break that down, but I think it looks kind of cool, at the very least. Quadrant, this number is randomly generated, and then it populates the whole question, but then it actually takes answers. The rest of this, this part that you can see here, all is a quiz that you just click on that when you're done. So kind of a math unit circle type stuff. What quadrant does negative 350 degrees fall into? It would be around here. That's quadrant 1, right? Happen to know the answers to this quiz that I made up before. But then, yeah, so it takes and it gives you a number of different responses, right? It gives you total feedback, but it also gives you feedback if you got absolutely everything correct. But otherwise, it gives you feedback on what you did. So that would be giving you 100. So let's say I get an 80, just by pulling those two. You can also change your name. It reflects that in the answer here. But once I'm done, it gives you an alert and says, okay, cool, Charlie, you earned an 80% on the quiz. Nice job. And the coolest thing you can do, or like the best ultimate thing you're going for, is if you get 100 on the page. Oops, oh, negative 315. Over here? Yeah, that's 45 degrees. Cool. So if you answer all of them correctly, and, whoops, doesn't matter who you say is taking the quiz really, but it's kind of cool. Even if you said no one, it'll just reflect that as saying no one. It'll just give you a more general message instead of a personalized one. But it says congratulate, or whatever. Congratulatory message here. You had a perfect score on the whole page. Show your teacher. Right, cool. But then otherwise, like I said, it only, or I guess I hadn't talked about it this week, but it is properly set up now as opposed to last time, where if you only answer a certain question, so with A, if I click on any of them, it'll count as me having answered them. And with B, if I click on any of these, it's going to assume I'm going to answer all those from B, right? But so for A, right, it'll say that I got 100, but it gives you different message actually if you just get one right. So 170 degrees should be in quadrant 2, right, because the 180 is right there. Right, so it's in quadrant 2. I've only answered question A, didn't answer B, didn't answer C at all. So it'll tell me that I got 100, right, or who got 100. Charlie got 100, right, for Charlie. Right, Charlie, you earned 100 on the quiz, great job, right? So different message there. But either way, that's the gist of it. A, B, and C kind of function all as a quiz there. And then this button really just calls the function in JavaScript to get all that done. So let's take a look at the actual code. I feel it's pretty organized. But everything very standard container fluid for Bootstrap, right? I have rows here. You can see I use some spacing stuff, right? So this is 5 out of the 12 columns there, another 4 here, and then the other 3 just unaccounted for, right, to put that stuff in there. But my drop-down menu, pretty simple. In this, you can see that I have all these different options here, right, of these different people involved, right? Otherwise, H1, right, very, very simple, just uses on mouse over, on mouse out, right? So that's this right here. on mouse over. So it's initially unit circle fun, and then it just gets reset to that using those two functions there. Otherwise, the form, right? So I'm actually able to click on things, make different decisions. But the bootstrap's pretty straightforward. Otherwise, you can see it's kind of interesting here on a JavaScript side, but the HTML is really kind of straightforward actually. So if I want to draw stuff, so I wanted to draw those lines, I said, okay, yeah, just draw a really, really basic picture, and then I'll draw the canvas over it. So the canvas allows you to draw stuff. It's a generally transparent thing. It's a 345 by 300. That happens to fit the square that I have, or the rectangle that I have there, right? And then the style, I said, okay, I just want this particular border. But otherwise, very, very simple as far as the HTML. Like I said, the JavaScript's more complicated. So for that first question we saw before, right, I wanted to, or not even question really, but I wanted to be able to click on these four options, right? So label, 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 right? If I'm just picking radio buttons there, pretty simple. But either way, these all call this draw angle function, and you can see that draw angle pretty straightforward, or not straightforward, but it's in JavaScript. As far as the HTML is concerned, kind of straightforward, right? I use the right symbols. You can see that here, right? So how many degrees is here, right? How many pi radians, right, are there? For those, which is kind of cool. But then again, I have another row here just for like the clear button. So clear button, it still calls draw angle, but draw angle I just had to do basically two things. It just governs all of the canvas things I have going on there. So drawing anything or clearing the whole canvas off is a lot easier because it's kind of funky JavaScript, frankly. But yeah, so otherwise, this is the part down here, right? The row that I have for the whole conversion piece, right? It's going to take on an input, and I have one button, two button, three buttons there. So one button, when you hover over it, converts it to from radians to degrees, right? From degrees to radians is the third button, or sorry, second button, third button, right? Button danger, and then just on mouse over it clears all of your conversions that you have. So that's again a data piece that we'll peep into JavaScript briefly. Or shortly from now, I guess. But anyway, yeah, so other things I have in here, so hover over, you can see this is a really, really direct paragraph, right? I had to use that ID to be able to access it from the JavaScript side, but really, really looks simple as far as adding in all this other stuff here, right? You can see that that's just a paragraph in my initial HTML, so that's kind of cool. Otherwise, next row, this is question A, right? So label and input, right, for my different radio buttons, right, because I can only pick one of those, right, just like you can only listen to one radio station. But yeah, so I have some checkboxes down here, pretty straightforward. This isn't actually that exciting in an HTML perspective because all of the relationships here are governed by the JavaScript. So when you click on the button at the end, right, it calls this function count, which is fairly complicated. Otherwise, let's take a look at the CSS quickly. It's not that wild, but yeah, to get those, to get the buttons relative around a certain question correct, I had to manually move stuff up and down, right? When I had the quadrant stuff, that was generally the same images. I said I want them all to be 300 by 300 and that border, right? This particular, or I said, okay, I want the canvas to be moved in a certain way. The picture underneath the canvas should be relative to get that to work properly. One of the quadrant fours versus the other quadrant four needed an extra nudging. Stuff when you hover over it is red. That's just a stylistic choice. But anyway, yeah, the cool stuff is we add in. Oops. Yeah, when I add in. Wow. Wild. So yeah, when I add in, you can see that the hover is red there. But I was saying when I add in these pieces right here, this list here. Yeah, so when I have this list here, right, you can see that some of the stuff is blue, some of the stuff is green, right? Where is all of this CSS coming from? Or, because again, in the HTML, it was kind of weird how that was just a regular paragraph, right? This is just a, where is that? Yeah, so you can see when I say angle to convert, eventually, right here, right, this is just a basic paragraph. So I have to add in some stuff, so I add in some other HTML via the JavaScript. But in the CSS, I give them some classes. So if it's degree conversions are blue, rating conversions are green, all conversions in general, right? So I just gave these new elements that I made up in HTML. I gave them 2 different classes, one of those 2, and then everybody got this. But the width is 400, margin auto just centers it, right? The border, I said I wanted it to be that same gray color, but a little bit translucent, and the background color is that same gray color that I had before. If you just say 555, convert it over RGBA, same thing, right? But I set the transparency or the opacity, whatever, to be 0.1, so only 10% of that color is shown per se. But yeah, you can see the little box effect. I think looks nice. So that's your CSS. That's exciting. Anyway, meat and potatoes are really the JavaScript. So data, pretty simple here, right? I have this data piece going on. Properties, I have degrees, whether or not it's degrees for that individual conversion. So if degrees is true, right, it's degrees going into radians. If it's degrees equals false, it's radians going into degrees. So what that initial angle is supposed to be, and then the output. So I just did the conversion for those because it wasn't that crazy really. But I have those 3 already in there, and that's why every time you load the page, you'll see these. Otherwise, you can see I put all of the function calls that were, for the most part, extant up here and the different variables. But I think just explaining those initial things isn't going to really be that illuminating. But who taking, right? So this particular function allows me to grab this piece here. That's really direct. Drawing an angle. Okay, so this is some stuff with Canvas. I had to look up the code to get a Canvas to go because I said, okay, well, I want to draw on there. What do I do? Follow it up on Canvas. But basically, I draw a line. It starts here, draw to there, and then, okay, based on what angle you clicked this, then don't draw anything else. But if you go to this angle, go up, right? Otherwise, go that way. Otherwise, go that way. Right, pretty simple. And for clearing, it just says, okay, draw a big, and we'll see this in JavaScript in a sec, but it just draws a big rectangle over the whole thing anyway. So, so if cleared, right, instead just clear this piece. So for some reason, I was having difficulty getting clearing it and drawing an angle to run as 2 different functions, but it seems to work fine just as one if I take 2 parameters. So hooray. Clearing, conversions. I tried to use just data equals an empty list, but for some reason sometimes it wasn't working. I don't know. Pop definitely works to get rid of stuff that you pushed there, so I was fine with this. But basically, yeah, while the length of data is greater than 0, just pop off the last element there. So I'm just clearing out these conversions, right? So again, if I hit this clear thing here, or just hover over it, you can see that list goes away. So just deletes everything in data essentially. Resets input, so you can see that if I have something started to type here, and then I clear that, then it's also going to empty that out, which is cool. It's another function we'll see in JavaScript, but that was pretty much from the Tinker. Display conversions just draws it to that list, so I want it to draw that there's nothing in there, once I clear it, so I wanted to update that piece. So no matches is going to check, because in general when I want to add stuff to this list here, I want to check anything in the list. If it matches, great. If it doesn't, so I can say 30 radians, right? Let's try 30 radians again. I don't want it to work, right? I don't want to just list a bunch of things I don't care about, right? I want this to be a calculator, and I want it to show all the different, calculations you already had. So display conversions, right? Updates there, no matches. It just checks whether or not all of those things match. If all 3 of them are match, hooray. Really, I guess I probably only need to change 2 because the output wouldn't be reflected there. But nevertheless, what it says is, okay, for every one of the conversions already in the data, check if all the things match with that thing that already existed. And if it did, then return false. Otherwise, so after you've gone through the whole for loop and none of them ended up being matches, it just returns true. So, but that's kind of how you need to set that for. This is kind of a for else per se, right? Because it's the way the return works. So hover greeting, right? We saw before, just takes whatever element I on and changes the HTML. So changes the text within that heading there just to be something different. So hover outgoing doesn't reflect any variable change. Set angle cover, right? It just takes whatever text is in there, changes it into an integer, and then saves it as variable for later. So reset input. resets whatever's in that blank to nothing, and it also changes the angle that I'm going to convert. So that number that's in there, we saw this problem in the Tinker, right? I wanted to be setting that to nothing so that I can't like click on degrees after I cleared it or something. So that line is actually really, really important, as we saw with the Tinker. Display conversions, this is kind of cool. We say, okay, our conversion list starts off with this amount of stuff for conversion in the data, right? We're writing some HTML in that for loop. If it's a degree, do this. If it's radians, do this. Otherwise, we're adding a paragraph within that paragraph, right? You can see here's the start. Right, here's the start of the paragraph, and then what classes we're going to add. So degree conversions versus radian conversions, right? And then that closes that opening tag there, or the end of that opening tag, and then the closing tag, it gets added on no matter what there. And no matter what, I say, okay, yeah, add to the convert the output element, right? Add that in for the inner HTML, that whole text there. So add in paragraphs basically into that spot. So otherwise, it just resets it every time. If you have no conversions in data and you call display conversions, it just puts in the original text there as well. So converting an angle, if it's already, if there's no angle to convert, just get out of the function. Otherwise, say, okay, yeah, we're starting a new conversion, so we're adding an object essentially. Data there. So some property value pairs, degree is whether or not it is degrees, that's passed in as a parameter there, right, when we call convert angle. So basically we say whether or not it's radians or degrees, and you can see that that's in the, this is going to be less clean, it's fine, yeah. So you can see that I say convert angle false versus convert angle true, so that parameter does directly get used. But otherwise, to say, okay, yeah, the degrees is just however many degrees it has, right? The angle is the angle to convert, so that number that we have from before. And the output is, well, it's just some mathematical change, right? That's kind of the whole idea of this. But then I overwrite that initial one if it turns out that it is degrees. So I assume that it's radians, and then otherwise I just rewrite it. Rather than use an if-else, like, it just seemed faster to me, I guess. But then, yeah, so I run if no matches. If there's no matches, right, then, yeah, go ahead, push that new object to data, right, hooray. Display conversions and reset input we've covered. Get random degree. This is for question A, right? So what quadrant does 161 fall into? Pick a random number, so this is 0 to 1, multiply by 1,000, so now we're talking 0 to 1,000, subtract 500, so it's negative 500, positive 500. Cool. Pick a floor, right? So that just chop off the decimal place entirely, gives me just a number to work with, so a whole number, or an integer, technically, right? An integer to work with, cool. So really I just wanted an integer number of degrees from negative 500 to positive 500, and then I need random degrees to be a variable that I use later on. But either way, I'm just going to write that question directly in. So question A doesn't really exist in the HTML. There's just a paragraph where it's supposed to go. But this writes it in directly, so I don't actually have to call any JavaScript from HTML. It just writes it in. So counting A, counting B, counting C, kind of straightforward, right? So the number that I'm going to be working with, right, random degrees, I have to find out what quadrant it's actually in. So I say, okay, if it's while it's less than 0, add 360. While it's at least 360, take away 360, right? And it eventually gets me to a number between 0 and 360, right? Based on it running through one of those if it weren't. So anyway, answer A, right? Which quadrant is it really in? So for question A, the question says, again, what quadrant does this random number fall into? I want to know which one this falls into. I think it's quadrant 2. I mean, based on math, whatever. But it can calculate the same thing, right? If it's taken an equivalent angle that's between 0 and 360 degrees, 359 degrees, right? It's going to be able to place it correctly in that quadrant. So I say, okay, the answer quad ID is whichever of those, right? And then I say, okay, if that particular one is the one that was checked, right, then add 1 to the score and say that we answered it, right? If any of them were checked, say that we answered, right? So this else if only shows up, so it's not going to double count. So you don't need to stress there. But that's A. So B, counting B, just says, okay, if any of them are checked, say that, yeah, you know, you answered 5 times, great. Or you answered all 5 questions. So it assumes that it answers all 5. So really, if you only answer 3, it's going to give you a weird number, but only so much I can do about that. Because you can't say, okay, yeah, if they never checked it, then, you know, it can't be activated. It's kind of weird. There's no way to really get around that, it seems. But yeah, so if certain ones are not checked, right, if they're false, then you get a point. If some things are checked, that it is true, you get a point, hooray. For C, Very, very incredibly similar looking thing, right? If anything checked, you get you answered 4. If you appropriately said that it was false or true, you get a point. Cool. So getting feedback, right, takes on a grade, right? So based on whatever your grade is, and the grade is something that's calculated through another function here, it says, okay, we're going to start off some feedback string, and the feedback string is going to get written based off of your grade. I think it's pretty direct and fair, right? Just a very simple if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else for that string piece. And then I start a full alert. So I'm putting the feedback string in that alert piece there. So it says full alert is starting to write the stuff out. If nobody's there, then write it to be impersonal, instead. So this is equal to start, right? Not plus equals to add something on. So I say, okay, yeah, if they didn't actually get a grade, so if grade is not a number, then say you didn't answer anything, bye, right? Personal or impersonal, right? So it has the double customization. It's really cool. But anyway, if they did answer something, then say, okay, yeah, if they answered everything and it's totally right, hooray, hooray, right? Say that you got a totally perfect score. Otherwise, feedback string, right, and grade, appropriate there. So alert, full alert. So whatever that full alert is, that's the full message that we have, and just pull that up as the alert on your page there. So calling count. Count is going to call get feedback at its very end, but otherwise count is pretty simple, and there's the potential here based on the way that these functions are set up to give feedback on each individual section. That'd be kind of cool, but just calls those different count functions. Says, okay, score is equal to the individual scores, answer is equal to the individual, how many you answered. Final score, pretty simple calculation. How many you got right over how many you answered, multiply that by 100, take the 4, give you a whole number, right, and then get feedback. So call get feedback based on whatever that final score is as your argument. So cool. And then I had to call display conversion somewhere because display conversions needs to run in the first time that you have a page going. So as soon as I hit refresh, I can't say, oh, on hover, on whatever for something else. I say, okay, yeah, just run this function immediately so that that stuff shows up. So the cool part, or not the cool part per se, but I really got a lot out of the debug mode, personally. So debug mode, I guess, isn't infinitely different than the live mode. But anyway, yeah. So I click on the debug mode. And sometimes when I resize the page, I couldn't really get around that, but the resizing the page really throws off where those answers are. It doesn't make a massive difference. But I used the debugging piece an absolute ton for this piece here, just because I didn't see stuff necessarily show up a lot. So I didn't use really the set points, the breakpoints, that didn't end up being too helpful for me because I was just clicking on stuff. And honestly, there were some times where we would just say like that little red X there to say that, oh, there's some error going on. But otherwise, absolutely fantastic stuff, right? To say like, okay, yeah, pause it, just go ahead. Right, so if I'm trying to hover over degrees, it says, okay, let's try to convert that angle. Let's read through, right? It just clicks through. I step into the next function. I never really step over because I want to see like exactly where it is. That's where I feel like this is less useful, the whole debugger tool on the whole. I was really frustrated when I had really, really long stuff to be able to access that. But it really did just catch a bunch of errors as soon as I just looked at debug mode. Like it'd say like, oh yeah, you spelled words wrong. I spelled conversion, conversation a number of times. I really have no idea why. But you can see that time I hit return really quickly because angle to convert, nothing was written in there. Keeps going and says, okay, I hovered over it again, great, exit. So hovered over this, right? It says, okay, draw angle, 0, true, right? And it goes through all this stuff. Maybe I could add in more functions, but the canvas thing particularly I didn't want to mess around with. Because I get through all of this to say, okay, yeah, angle 0 should be drawn because it has to take on some order, so I put in 0. But then when I finally get to, if it's cleared, okay, yeah, it should be cleared, right? Because you can see that it drew on the 0 actually very, very quickly there, and then it removes it. So again, I think the debugger tool has worked really well for me. I don't really play around with the console as much to try to get the individual pieces to work. And again, the page kind of just looks weird when I shrink it a smidge, but I liked having the hover pieces. But you could see on that run there that that this was just automated, right, or rerun there. But yeah, so the debugger tool really, really helpful because a lot of times, and I'll show you this now, but when I run this here, if I click on any button, it tends to give me some sort of error. Not after that. It says like bad path, and it goes away for like a second. But that was a really problematic piece in the middle of this for some reason. So once I got rid of the bad pen issue, or sorry, the bad path issue, it made it a lot easier. But in the meantime, anytime I wanted to click on something and have it run, I had to do it in debug mode. So that was really helpful there. But on the whole, this was a fun project. I really enjoyed it. I feel like I got a ton out of it. But the exploratory piece was really great. I kind of started with I knew what I wanted in mind, and then I added in other pieces here. But I'm really happy with how this came out. As far as how I would want to improve this, I really want to add in this piece right here. I'd like to be adding on. I would like it to like show off a picture of that angle too. That would be really difficult to do though. So that's where I'm at. That's what I would add in. But otherwise, base page honestly looks pretty similar to what I had in my original project here, but it is really fully functional now, and I feel really good about that. So cool.